I'm going to stay in this exact position, I think, throughout the entire video because I'm at genuine danger of my pants ripping wide open. And the only more embarrassing thing of that happening is that happening on camera. So,
even on those undersized calves, it's tight.
They're huge calves. Biggest calves you've ever seen. Leading to Vancouver's highest arches. Hashtag Mankles. Anyway,
women's legs, ladies and gentlemen, women's legs. Welcome to this week's topic, which is we're gonna
controversial.
I was gonna say we'll make it a little controversial, but yeah, I guess it technically
There'll
is.
be a little bit of the usual Jay hating on the government in there, I'm sure, at some place. There usually always is. But we're going to talk about the 2%, I guess, rent increase.
Everyone hates it. On both sides of the fence. They all hate it.
That's true, whether you realize you hate it or not. But basically,
I think they all realize they hate it.
Renters don't realize they hate it.
Of course they do. They didn't want an increase. They were up in arms. 2%. It's COVID. 2%. Jesus. How dare they? Their own... No government talk.
Anyway, so over 2 minutes into the video, I changed positions. Wait. As part of the $1 billion plan from Horgan and the Inflation Act, they're capping rent increases and they're doing some other like grants and stuff that they're giving. Of course, the usual, this money is not actually going to make a difference to you. Like if you're given 140 quid, sorry, 140 quid, 140 bucks. It's not going to make a difference to your life, even 140 pounds wouldn't at the moment. But basically the big talk is they're holding the rent increases at 2%. And Jay, is it a good or a bad thing?
We can go on a variety of different tangents to answer that. And we're going to see both sides of that coin. But I believe it's a bad thing because I believe that it is, how not to be overly negative on this, I believe that it's screwing landlords.
Okay.
I'm going to leave it at that.
So what actually happens is the 2% rent increase actually screws you as a renter more than it does a landlord. It inconveniences.
You don't say. Let's go down that.
We're going down that route.
Path.
It inconveniences landlords definitely, and depending on the financial situation can be a real challenge.
I wouldn't say it's an inconvenience to landlords. I would say it's this is how things work from the government to you homeowners, which we are slowly grasping more and more of your lives from. But when we want things to change, it's going to change like this, and we don't give two about what we said before.
Okay.
Sorry, continue.
So what happens with rent increases? You as a renter, you find it and you're like, okay, my rent increase is going to go up 2%. I'll work it out. Okay, I can afford that. Hopefully that works great. It's only going to go up 2%. I'm not going to be, it's not going to go up the odd like 20, 30% or whatnot that it has over the year.
Well, technically,
carry on.
2% plus inflation.
No, it's 2%.
I know that. But 2% plus inflation is what it's supposed to be.
It doesn't matter what it's supposed to be. Government is supposed
Back
to
to
be
my
there
point.
for us
Back to my
for all
point.
of our points. Anyway,
point.
the 2% increase you think is great. Well, maybe you're not happy about it, but it's only 2%. What actually happens though is it's short-term gain for long-term pain.
You've been waiting to say that line all week, haven't you?
I'm just going to say a sentence, I'll stop and then you say a sentence. But basically what happens is it restricts the investment in real estate. And to all of you guys out there thinking landlords suck, they're the worst, blah, blah, blah. Landlords are actually the only reason that you have a place to rent, funnily enough. It restricts actually investment in the area so bad that it can further on lead to companies, larger companies not investing in the area, which takes away jobs and so on and so forth. So much so that in 1993, Nova Scotia actually abolished rent control. I don't know if they brought it back in a variety yet, could have checked that point, but they did it because they were in so much fear that people were not going to invest in real estate, it was going to collapse the market, and it was not going to bring other investors in, large companies in as well. Why that should matter to you is Canada is so reliant upon the housing sector towards its GDP. So if things start crashing in the real estate market, the Canadian economy starts crashing and all of our lives get worse. In a nutshell. And you know where I actually found out about the Nova Scotia abolished it in '93? It was from a Global News article back in March 2017. And it was actually an article on the dangers of rent control.
Surprising considering who owns the global news.
So what happens with the rent control side of things is investors are less interested in investing in rentals, so therefore you have less supply on the market. Less supply on the market means there's not enough supply to cope with demand, which is clearly what we're seeing. It's very common all across Canada to have a 1%, possibly less than 1% vacancy rate. What that happens is it pushes prices up, like we've seen. And also the quality of the product just gets worse and worse and worse, because if people are not coming into the market, demand is still there, but supply is not. So people don't need to repair their places. They just say, we don't need to upkeep it, because if it goes on the market, somebody's gonna take it because there's not enough supply. So therefore, it actually shafts you way worse than what you think. Jay, you wanna add anything to this so far?
I just think that the general perspective right now is that negative from the tenant side, they didn't want an increase at all. Negative from the landlord side, they wanted more of an increase as their costs have gone up. To your point, their costs go up in the back end. They can't recoup that on the front end by raising rent, and that investment starts to look a lot less appealing. And then again, those go back into the market. So what a lot of the double-edged sword of this is that people say, tenants say, I hate landlords, they're the worst, blah, blah, blah. There shouldn't be investment. There should be caps on investment of real estate because that's pulling properties out of the market. And then obviously for them to potentially purchase. And then in this circumstance, when this all takes place and landlords no longer want to be landlords putting product on the market, it's just pulling inventory out of the market, screwing them as tenants. So it's really, the more you hurt the landlord, the more the secondary knock-on effects will inevitably hurt the tenant if it means there's less inventory, meaning rental inventory and their rental prices go up, or less purchasable inventory, never letting them have a chance to actually buy into the market and become non-renters. So it just, to your point, it's a negative either way, and the ball should continue to roll as it always has, but the more government hands you get on things, this is another prime example, it just hurts the people at the bottom, which in this case is the tenants.
And I mean, if you're a landlord and you're getting capped on how much you can increase your rent, especially at the moment, why would you invest? Your inflation has gone up. We'll use the official numbers, anywhere between, well, I think it's somewhere in the 7% right now. We're waiting for the latest figure. Interest rates have gone up, so you're paying more on your mortgage, you're paying more on your everyday stuff, you're paying more on your energy bills, you're paying more on gas. You're basically paying more on everything by significantly more than 2%. And you're restricted to just a 2% increase. So landlords, believe it or not all of them are just money grabbing. But a lot of them now are making far less now than they were this time last year. So where does that encourage further investment?
And due to the cost of real estate in general, you give me your number on this, investors that I have worked with in the past, in the 90 percentile, all investment properties are negatively cash flowing in the markets prior to all of this crazy inflation over the last 15 years. Everyone's looking at this as Vancouver and Toronto.
Everyone who bought in the last X amount of years are now negative because of the changes?
Yeah, well, were negative before these changes, before this inflation, before these lack of being able to properly increase rent. So Vancouver and Toronto are looked at as growth markets. I'll take them negative every month in this investment because the growth is going to happen, 100%.
100%, you think the vast majority of rentals are negative?
I think in the 90 percentile, yes.
And so they're actually costing the landlords money every month?
In the 90 percentile, for sure. We looked at an investment property, Mika and I, back when one-bedroom rents were $2,100. The cost of a one-bedroom was $600,000. At current rates back then, I don't remember what it was, 3 something, you had to put 50% down. So $300,000, if this was a personal, most people don't purchase in corporations, so after tax dollars, 300 grand to break even on that one bedroom investment. What percentage of people are doing that? I would say single digits. So back then, I'm gonna say 10 to 15 years, generally speaking, I'll say 10, because I haven't researched this, but just from memory of clients that I've worked with on all spectrums of that, 90% are negatively cash flowing, and they're assuming, well, I'll hold it for X amount of time and I'll recoup all of this negative monthly loss when I sell, because it's a growth market and the principal values are just going to continue.
Well, I definitely haven't found that, that's for sure. But your story is a prime example of what happens. You look at it, what does the future look like? And you haven't even mentioned, well, the rent's going to increase every year, so I'm going to get more money. You've just looked at it on the capital gains side of things, which is, you know, you've got to sell in order to get that. You've not mentioned anything about the rental, which is exactly part of the problem. The motivation is not there. I would say, I think there's a lot more people who now are in the negative of renters now post this increase and whatnot. Sure. But I mean, not to get too into it and whatnot, but I think it's important to say as well, the 2% hold, also it doesn't work. You compare rents this time last year, they've gone up more than 2%. So what it actually does is it protects you in the here and now, provided you are staying. As soon as your life circumstance changes and you need to move to a different rental, you're actually a victim of that 2% increase, the more demand, the less supply. And that showed. Canada on average, rent went up 11.1% year over year. That's Canada on average. You go to Vancouver, that number is 18.8%, September 21, September 22. Toronto, 17.1%. Lloydminster, Alberta, 15.2%. Calgary, Alberta, 29.8%. Guelph, Ontario, 16.6%. Gatineau, Quebec, 11.1%. So they've all got typically some form of rent control, which is usually, to your point, like you were mentioning earlier, inflation plus X amount of percent, whatever they put on it. All of these places have rent control, and if it's at 2%, our market's gone up more than 2%. It's gone up, 18.8% on average. Not uncommon to see, depending on property type, the most property types that people need, the 1 and 2 bedrooms, to go up 25%.
Yeah, and I think to your point, short term, of course, if I'm a newly married couple and we're in a 1 bed and we get pregnant and we now need a 2 bed, it may be great this year, but the market around you for new tenants, as anyone can charge whatever they want for new tenants, is climbing and climbing and climbing. So inevitably, of course, it will catch up to you as a tenant. So you're kind of screwed either way. You're saving it now in order to pay it later, but the interest is that 2%. I mean, so take Vancouver, you're like 900% paying it later, because you're holding the rent increase at 2% now, but when you move out to something else, you're going to pay 18.8%. And on top of that, you'd be moving from a 1 bed to, let's say, a 2 bed. Maybe you'd be conservative if your wife will allow you, which mine wouldn't, and you'd go from a 1 bed to a 1 and a den, but still you're jumping up, the price is jumping up organically, plus all of this kind of pent up demand, Vancouver, whatever it is, 18% and blah, blah, blah. So there's no result in that other than just be as conservative as you can, save more money and buy.
And it's easy for us to sit here and say this, and you're going to be thinking, well, that's all well and good in theory, but I've got an interesting concept for you, which I'm going to give you some numbers here, which is probably going to surprise you a lot. I'm going to compare us to to a far more major city than we are. Good old London. UK. So just to paint the picture for you a little bit of London, the last consensus that came out there was 8.982 million people in London in 2019. If we take the Vancouver population in 2019, 2.556 million. Significantly different numbers there. Canada, widely bigger than the UK, London in particular. So London has no rental restrictions in terms of rent increase. What you only have to stick to is it has to be market value. So if you're renting out for £1,000 a month, you can't then come in and say, okay, well, you're now going to pay £2,500 a month at the end of your lease. It has to be market rent. So When we look at what London has done over the past year, so Vancouver has gone up rent-wise 18.8% year over year. London has gone up 10.8%. So London pretty much has 3 times the population
and almost half
Vancouver, nowhere near the size in terms of real estate, and it's gone up almost half the same as Vancouver. So to put that in perspective, your average rent in London is £1,898. That's $2,816.
Average rent for? That's
just average London rent across the board. So you take Vancouver, let's say you take 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, as they're pretty much the most dominant, and you take them, the average is 2,574, and we're even, relying heavily on the low end of rents here in Vancouver. So you're almost practically the same amount, and London's quite a different city. Now, what makes this very interesting is, as I mentioned, London doesn't have the restrictions on rental increase. So Vancouver in 2016, there was a rent cap increase, or a rent increase cap of 2.9%. The market rose 6.91% in the rental market. London, in 2016, no cap. The market rose 1.4% for rentals. 2017, there was a rental cap of 3.7%. The actual market price for rentals, 6.5%. It went up another 6.05%. London, that year, didn't actually change, stayed the same. 2018, there was a rental increase cap of 4%. The market actually increased 6.78%. And 2018 in London, increased 0.5%.
So that's a total Vancouver increase of almost 19% in those 3 years, and yep. London under 2%.
So it's it's all well and good where you feel like it suits you well now, but that's a prime example of what it actually does to you in the long term. Showcased in a city which will have, or should have, a vastly more considerable problem with rentals than we do, and it's vastly more expensive. Your average price in London is vastly more expensive than your average price here in Vancouver.
I think we're now going to come down to the realities of London. We can safely say is much more comparable to Toronto in the sense that it houses the vast majority of we'll call it the business hub of the country. Mm-hmm. I think if you look at incomes, it will surpass every other province. Shire, whatever the hell they're called in England.
Shire?
Is that what they're called?
Counties.
Sorry.
I'm from Hampshire, technically.
But for so long, Vancouver's an international city. Look at us, blah, blah, blah. And because of cheap interest rates and a variety of other things, none of the details ever really mattered because it just kept going up. But now we're going to see that it does matter, and a lot of those bigger paying jobs here, which are not comparable, this shouldn't be anywhere near a valid comparison, yet Vancouver blows it out of the water. Yeah. In this, which is just stupid.
Scarily so. Scarily so.
And it just goes back to prove again, the more, and yes, it may suit you this year, only getting your 2% as a tenant, but the more government hands that touch the market, the more expensive it gets. And that's all it comes down to.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time. There's to government, there's the political side of things, which is we want to look popular and we want to look appealing to people. And then there's the actual economic side of it as, okay, what actually makes this the case and what actually makes the country move forward from an economic standpoint. And they're two different things, and it's just what is more convenient. Economics as a whole is it's a social science, i.e. if you're doing physics or something like that, you can actually do a test there and then and you can get an outright result. A lot of economics, you can't test an economy. And because of that, a lot of it is an interpretation of data. So there's a lot of disagreement. But on this point, particularly the rental cap increases actually have the opposite effect and actually cause market rents to increase substantially. 93% of economists agree on this. And that's a huge percent for when you're talking about economists agreeing. So it's I mean, it's suiting you now if you're in the same place, but again, short-term gain for long-term pain. Controversial, but we've got to give the facts.
And these are the facts. I think that's it.
And I mean, I got these numbers from rental.ca, rentals.ca. They constantly do monitor rent in Canada all across. And then the London numbers were from HomeLet, property rental specialists. They do the same thing and they track all different areas, London and stuff as well. So, I mean, these are reliable sources with scary numbers.
Yeah, very frightening numbers that are kind of, it's nice to be ahead and on top of a lot of charts and graphs, but that's not one that we should be proud of whatsoever, because that's going to screw a lot of people.
That's it.
Okay. I think that's it, unless you have another 2 cents to add.
I think that pretty much sums us up for this week.
We will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the facts and the figures. And what was your tagline on that again?
To be determined.
No, the thing that you say that you've been waiting to say all week. Short-term.
Short-term loss, short-term gain, long-term loss. No, short-term gain, long-term pain. Smooth, very smooth.
I'm back with the 20-minute mark.